Right now, you are carrying about 5 million hair follicles. A chimpanzee your size has roughly the same number, packed into roughly the same skin. The two of you barely differ in how much hair you grow. You differ enormously in what that hair does. The chimp grows thick, dark, fistful hair. You grow something so fine and faint that you spend your whole life believing you are bald. You are not bald. You are running a near-perfect disguise on yourself. Good enough that we built a multi-billion-dollar industry around the few patches of obvious hair that survived. Look at where you actually kept it. The top of your head, your eyebrows, your armpits, and a couple of places we will come back to. Out of your entire body, evolution decided those were the spots worth keeping fuzzy and stripped the rest down to almost nothing. Every other large mammal went the other way. Gorillas, wolves, bears, horses, every climate and every continent, all wearing full coats, while one pink primate stands in the middle of them looking like it lost a bet. We are the naked ape, the phrase the zoologist Desmond Morris stamped on a book cover in 1967, and almost 60 years later, most people still cannot say why it is true. The cooling story you have heard is real. It is also nowhere near complete, and the parts nobody mentions are stranger than the part everybody does. If you're enjoying this so far, hit the like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I actually read them. The famous version goes like this. A few million years ago, some of our ancestors left the shade of the forest and walked out onto the open grasslands of Africa, where the sun does not negotiate. Upright on two legs, they spent their days walking, and eventually running, across exposed ground in serious heat. A thick coat in that environment is close to a death sentence. Fur traps warmth against the body, and a large active animal that cannot dump heat fast enough will overheat, stagger, and collapse before it catches anything. So we shed the coat to stay cool. As far as it goes, this is right, and the machinery behind it is impressive. As our ancestors lost their fur, they grew something almost no other large animal carries in the same amount, a huge network of eccrine sweat glands. You have somewhere between 2 and 5 million of them. Working hard in heat, you can pour out more than a liter of sweat an hour, and far more than that in extreme conditions. The sweat sits on bare skin and evaporates, and evaporation pulls heat straight off the body. A horse sweats too, but nowhere near as efficiently. A dog can barely sweat at all, and has to stand there panting with its tongue out. You are, with no exaggeration, one of the finest evaporative cooling machines that has ever existed, which is a peculiar thing to learn about yourself while sitting perfectly still. This is the engine behind something anthropologists call persistence hunting. In 2004, the Harvard biologist Daniel Lieberman and Dennis Bramble of the University of Utah set out the case in the journal Nature that the human body is built from the ground up for endurance running. Long legs, springy tendons, a special ligament that steadies the head as you stride, and that enormous cooling system. The image is almost funny and completely real. A human cannot outsprint an antelope. A human can, in the heat of the afternoon, follow one at a patient jog for hours until the animal, unable to sweat the way we do, overheats and simply stops. Speed was never the point. Outlasting the antelope was. Take the coat off, add the sweat glands, and a slow, soft primate becomes the most stubborn predator on the plain. This is not a guess pieced together from bones. People were still doing it within living memory. In the Kalahari Desert, hunters of the sand have been recorded chasing kudu and other antelope across the sand in the full heat of the day, jogging and tracking for 2, 3, sometimes 5 hours, until the animal, faster over any short distance but unable to shed heat, finally founders and stops running. The researcher Louis Liebenberg spent years documenting these hunts and joined them himself, and what he saw matches the anatomy exactly. The human loses every sprint and wins the afternoon. The animal carries a coat it cannot escape and a cooling system that quits under sustained effort, while the hunter carries almost no coat at all and a skin that simply weeps water and keeps going. Watching a barefoot man run an antelope to exhaustion is about as close as you can get to seeing the reason for our bare skin acted out in real time. It is a clean story, and a child could follow it. It also starts to crack the moment you check the calendar. Here is the trouble with cooling as the whole answer. If we lost our hair purely to run and hunt in the heat, you would expect one simple cause. Instead, The deeper you dig, the more reasons you find stacked on top of each other, and several of them have nothing to do with temperature. Start with the parasites. In 2003, Mark Pagel of the University of Reading and Walter Bodmer of Oxford published an argument with a blunt point, that a naked ape would carry fewer parasites. A coat of fur is excellent real estate for ticks, lice, fleas, and mites, passengers that do more than itch, since many of them carry disease. Strip the fur and you strip their shelter. Bare skin gives a biting tick almost nowhere to hide, and gives you almost nowhere for one to settle unnoticed. Once that pressure exists, something interesting follows from it. If clear, hairless skin signals a body relatively free of parasites and disease, then clear skin becomes attractive, because picking a healthy mate is one of the oldest games in biology. Smooth skin stops being only a cooling surface and starts being an advertisement, which drags in the one name nobody expects in a conversation about body hair: Charles Darwin. In 1871, in The Descent of Man, Darwin looked at human hairlessness and decided that cooling could not explain all of it, and that the real force was sexual selection, mate choice grinding away over countless generations. He noted that the pattern of hair we keep and lose differs between men and women, which is exactly what you would expect from a trait shaped by attraction rather than survival alone. For a long time, this was treated as the slightly embarrassing cousin of the cooling theory. It has aged better than that. You can still see his point on a human face. Men grow beards and heavier body hair. Women generally do not. And that split appears at puberty alongside everything else the body uses to advertise maturity and fitness. A trait that lands differently on the two sexes and switches on exactly when mating starts to matter is almost a signature of sexual selection at work. Temperature does not care whether you are male or female. Mate choice always has. Now test the idea against the rest of the animal world, because we are not quite as alone as the naked ape label suggests. A handful of other large mammals went bald too, and looking at why tells you something. Whales and dolphins are smooth-skinned, having traded fur for blubber once their ancestors went back into the sea, where a coat is useless and a layer of fat does the insulating. Hippos spend their days in water and wallow to stay cool. Elephants and rhinos are nearly hairless for a different reason: sheer size. A very large body holds heat well because it has relatively little surface compared to its volume, so the problem for an elephant is not staying warm but getting rid of heat, and a thick coat would only make that worse. The naked mole rat went bald underground, in tunnels where the temperature barely changes. Look across all of them and a rough rule appears. Mammals tend to lose their hair when they are aquatic, or enormous, or living somewhere the temperature never shifts. Humans fit none of those. We are medium-sized, land-bound, and we evolved in a climate that swings hard between blistering days and cold nights. By every normal expectation, we should have kept our fur, and we did not, which is exactly why our case has drawn so many competing explanations, and one very famous wrong one. For decades, a theory floated around that humans went through a watery phase. The marine biologist Alistair Hardy suggested it in 1960, and the writer Elaine Morgan spent years making the case that our hairlessness, our upright posture, and our fat layer all pointed to a semi-aquatic ancestor wading and swimming along ancient shores. It is a tidy idea, and it is almost certainly wrong. The fossils place our ancestors out on grass and scrub, not on beaches. The anatomy lines up far better with walking and running than with swimming. Mainstream paleoanthropology set the aquatic ape aside long ago, but it survives in the popular imagination precisely because human nakedness feels like it demands some dramatic, single, story-shaped answer. The truer answer is less of a story and more of a pile-up, several pressures acting at once over an unimaginable stretch of time. Your own body still carries the fingerprints of the coat it lost. Beside almost every follicle sits a tiny muscle called the erector pili. When you are cold or frightened, those muscles contract and yank each hair upright. In a furred animal, this fluffs the coat into a thicker blanket, or makes the creature look bigger to a rival. When it fires in you, it lifts hairs mostly too small to matter and leaves you covered in goosebumps. You are operating the controls for a coat that left more than 1,000,000 years ago, and the reflex never got the memo. Then there is the question of why we kept hair exactly where we did, which looks random and turns out to be the opposite. The hair on your scalp shades the top of your head, the part that takes the most direct hit from a sun standing high overhead near the equator, and that layer traps a little cushion of cooler air against the skin. Your eyebrows sit at just the angle to catch sweat and rain running down your forehead and steer it sideways before it floods your eyes, which matters enormously if your life depends on watching prey across a shimmering plain. The coarse hair that shows up at puberty in the armpits and groin lines up with yet another clue. Those areas are crowded with apocrine glands, a different type that makes a thicker, scent-rich secretion, and the hair there helps trap and broadcast that scent. In a species that leaned on smell to signal who was ready to mate and who belonged to which band, those tufts were doing social work. We did not keep them by accident. We kept them because they were still paying rent. If this is making you think, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. This channel only exists because of the people who share these videos, and I don't take that lightly. There is a stranger echo still, and you lived through it before you were born. Around the 5th month in the womb, a human fetus grows a complete coat of fine, downy hair called lanugo. It covers nearly the whole body, the back, the shoulders, the forehead, a soft pelt on a creature that will spend its life as the naked ape. Then, usually before birth and sometimes in the first weeks after, that coat is shed, much of it swallowed by the fetus and passed in the first days of life. For a few months in the dark, every one of us is briefly furred, replaying in fast-forward a stage our ancestors left behind more than 1,000,000 years ago. The body still knows how to build the coat. It simply changed its mind about keeping it, and it makes that decision again in every pregnancy, growing the fur and then taking it back. That fetal coat hints at a broader idea about how we ended up bare in the first place. The biologist Stephen Jay Gould spent a good deal of his career on the observation that humans look, in many ways, like ape fetuses and infants that never finished growing up. Our flat faces, our large heads relative to our bodies, the late closing of our skull bones, and our thin body hair all resemble the juvenile form of our nearest relatives more than the adult one. Young apes are far less hairy than the adults they become. The proposal, called Neoteny, is that humans evolved partly by slowing development down and holding on to those youthful traits into adulthood, and that our sparse hair came along as part of that package rather than being selected entirely on its own. Whether hairlessness was the target or a passenger is still argued, but the resemblance is hard to wave away. In some real sense, we are apes that kept the smooth skin of childhood and never grew the coat. To pin down when all this happened, you run straight into a wall, because hair does not fossilize. Soft tissue rots. A follicle leaves no trace for an archaeologist to uncover 2,000,000 years later, so the date of our hair loss had to be recovered sideways, through a clue hidden in our skin color. Notice something strange about a chimpanzee. Under all that dark hair, a chimp's skin is pale, pinkish, close to a fair human tone. The fur was shielding the skin from the sun, so the skin underneath never needed much pigment of its own. Our ancestors almost certainly began the same way, pale-skinned beneath a covering of hair. Now thin that hair out under the equatorial African sun, and you create a sudden, serious problem. Bare pale skin in that much ultraviolet light is not only a sunburn risk. Ultraviolet radiation tears apart folate, a B vitamin your body relies on for healthy fetal development and for sperm production. That is not a cosmetic concern. That is a direct strike against reproduction, the one thing natural selection protects above all else. The anthropologist Nina Jablonski at Penn State built much of her career on this chain of reasoning. Once we lost the cover of fur, she argues, there was heavy pressure to evolve a new shield, and that shield was melanin. Dark, pigment-rich skin soaks up and scatters ultraviolet light and guards the folate underneath. Dark human skin did not come first. It evolved as a direct result of losing our hair. The coat came off, and the skin had to build its own protection from scratch. This hands scientists a clock. The genetic machinery for dark skin, including a gene called MC1R, can be read for how long it has sat under strong selection. In 2004, the geneticist Alan Rogers at the University of Utah studied variation in MC1R and concluded that dark, protective skin was already in place somewhere around 1.2 million years ago. Now run the logic backwards. If we needed dark skin by then, we must already have lost enough hair to make dark skin necessary by then. so the coat was largely gone more than 1 million years ago, in the age of Homo erectus, an ancestor whose skeletons already show a frame built for long-distance walking on open ground. The boy from Neoteny, a nearly complete Homo erectus skeleton, found near Lake Turkana in Kenya in 1984 by the fossil hunter Kamoya Kimeu and Richard Leakey's team, lived around 1.5 million years ago and had exactly that long-limbed, heat-adapted build. The bare skin, the upright stride, and the sweat glands were already assembling that far back, hundreds of thousands of years before anything we would call modern human behavior. That detail about skin color deserves a slow second look because it leads somewhere much larger than hair. Follow the chain one more step. Dark skin evolved in Africa to guard against ultraviolet light once the fur was gone. Then, starting a few 100,000 years ago and picking up speed after our species spread out of Africa, some populations pushed into the higher latitudes of Europe and northern Asia, where the sun is weaker and slants low for much of the year. There, the same dark skin that had been protective turned into a different problem. Ultraviolet light is dangerous in excess, but you need a certain dose of it on your skin to make vitamin D, which your bones and your immune system cannot do without. Skin dark enough to flourish on the equator screens out too much of that thin northern light. So in those populations, across many generations, selection pushed the other way, and skin lightened. Lay the result over a globe, and the pattern is impossible to miss. Human skin color grades, region by region, with the strength of the ultraviolet light each population's ancestors lived under. It is, underneath everything, a record of sunlight written into the body. Now, set that beside where we started. The single most visible feature of another person, the trait human societies have used to divide, rank, enslave, and kill one another for centuries, the thing people treat as the most basic fact about a stranger across a street, is a side effect of cooling. It exists at all only because a population of upright apes on the African grassland lost their body hair more than 1 million years ago, and their bare skin had to start handling sunlight on its own. No loss of fur, no need for melanin to guard the folate, no dark skin, no later lightening in the north, none of it. The entire range of human complexion sits downstream of a follicle decision made by Homo erectus. Every shade of every human who has ever lived is a footnote to the day we took the coat off. There is something almost dizzying in that. We lost our hair for a tangle of reasons, to cool down and to run and to drop parasites and to look healthy to a mate, and not one of those ancestors could have guessed that the deepest consequence would not be the running or the cooling. It would be the color of the skin the missing hair exposed, and the weight that future humans, tens of thousands of years on, would load onto that color, a weight the skin itself never carried and never asked to. There is one more layer underneath even that, and it sits behind your eyes. The human brain is a ferociously expensive organ. It burns through about 1/5 of your energy and it runs hot, and brain tissue is dangerously sensitive to overheating. The anthropologist Dean Falk has argued that the cooling tricks our ancestors developed, the network of veins around the skull, the sweating, the shaded scalp, and the upright posture that lifted most of the body away from the radiating ground, helped keep that hot, growing brain from cooking itself. On this view, losing the fur did more than help us chase antelope. It may also have lifted a ceiling on how large and how active the human brain could safely become. The same exposure that gave us sweat and sunlit skin may also have given the brain room to grow, which means the thing reading these words owes part of its size to the coat its ancestors left behind. One question still hangs over all of this. Once the climate turned cold, and our ancestors pushed into Ice Age Europe and the frozen edges of Asia, why did we never simply grow the fur back? Other animals thicken their coats for the cold readily enough. The likely answer is that by then we had stopped solving the problem with biology and started solving it with technology. We had fire, and later we had clothing, and an animal that can wrap itself in the skins of other animals has no need to evolve its own. The bare skin was locked in. There is even a faint genetic timestamp on the moment we got dressed. The geneticist David Reed at the University of Florida traced the body louse, a parasite that lives only in clothing rather than on the skin, and found that it split from the head louse somewhere on the order of 100,000 years ago, give or take. Instead of regrowing the coat, we learned to put one on in the morning and take it off at night, which is a thing no other creature on Earth has ever done. So come back to the body you are sitting in. 5 million follicles, about as many as a chimp, nearly all of them growing hair too fine to see. Calling it loss undersells what actually happened. We swapped a coat, slowly and without ever agreeing to it, for sweat and sunlight and skin that feels everything, and for the strange daily freedom to choose what, if anything, to put back on. The sweat let your ancestors run animals into the ground under a sun that should have killed them. Dark skin grew to guard that bare surface, and lighter skin followed as people carried it into colder, dimmer places. Those goosebumps you still get are the body saluting a coat gone for over 1,000,000 years. Even the brain behind your eyes may have grown into the space the fur left open. The chimpanzee in the forest never had to think about any of it. You have already made the choice today, the way you make it every morning without noticing, when you decided what to wear. That is the quiet inheritance of the naked ape. The coat came off once, an enormous span of time ago, and every one of us has been living inside the consequences of bare skin ever since. Most of us never once stopping to wonder why we, alone in a world of fur, get to feel the wind. Thank you for watching until the end. If this changed how you see something, check out the videos on screen. I think they will hit the same way. And subscribe if you haven't. See you in the next one.